I never thought silence could kill a person. But in this red brick house on the outskirts of Austin, the silence between Richard and me had become a living creature. It breathed, it moved, and every day it fed on us a little more. I'm a nurse. I've spent my entire life learning to recognize the smallest signs. Before a body collapses, a shallow breath, a distracted gaze. And now I could see the same signs in my own marriage, only this time there was no medicine to save it. It all started on a Thursday afternoon, one of those suffocating Texas days when the air feels thick enough to choke. I had just finished a 12-hour shift. My scrub still smelled of antiseptic and sweat, that familiar scent Richard used to call the smell of angels, but he hadn't said that in a long time. I pulled up in front of the house, my old gray Ford creaking as it stopped, and saw his Tesla already parked in the garage. That was strange. Richard was always home late. His pharmaceutical company was expanding into New Mexico, and he would always tell me, "I'm busy. Honey, just have dinner without me." But that day he was home early. The front door was slightly open. The warm light from the living room spilled into the hallway, mixing with the smell of grilled meat and a hint of woody cologne. I could hear faint jazz playing from the speaker, "Autumn Leaves," the song I used to play on our early romantic nights. He was sitting there in a crisp white shirt, a glass of red wine in his hand, smiling as I walked in. "You're home, Diane. I made dinner for you." I smiled lightly, but suspicion flickered in my chest. He never cooked, not unless there was a reason, or someone worth impressing. On the table sat 2 plates of steak neatly arranged and a half-open bottle of Malbec. I asked softly, "What's the occasion?" He shook his head. "Nothing. I just missed you. We haven't had much time together lately." I nodded, pretending to believe him, though the unease in my gut refused to settle. We ate in silence. He asked me a few shallow questions about the hospital, a patient I'd been caring for, then quickly switched the topic to his company. I listened, but my mind drifted. When he bent down to cut his steak, I noticed a faint lipstick stain on his collar, a pale red mark, not the shade I wear. My heart froze. I forced my voice to stay calm. "There's something on your collar." He flinched slightly and wiped it off. Must be wine. But I know the difference between wine and lipstick. I'm a nurse. I notice every detail, stains, blood, tears. That without question was lipstick. That night, after he fell asleep, I quietly got out of bed and went down to the basement, his so-called workspace. I wasn't planning to snoop. I just wanted answers. On his desk beside the laptop was a small, silver-wrapped gift box. I hesitated for a few seconds, then opened it. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet engraved with the words, "To E." "You make me feel alive again. E. Not Diane." It felt like someone had wrapped a fist around my chest. My hands trembled as I put everything back exactly as it was, closed the box, and turned to leave. That's when I saw a receipt on the desk. It read Luna Jewelry, San Antonio, Texas. I'd never been to San Antonio with Richard, but he had mentioned a business trip there 3 weeks ago. I glanced at the clock, 11:45 p.m. Out of pure instinct, the same instinct that drives me to record a patient's every vital sign before their heart gives out, I took out my phone and snapped photos, the receipt, the box, every detail. I didn't even know why. I just knew that when suspicion starts to live inside you, survival makes you collect evidence. The next morning, he had already left. I brewed coffee, sat at the kitchen table, watched the sunlight filter through the blinds, and felt the world shift into something unfamiliar. 30 years together, 28 years of marriage, a lifetime of trust, and now a single lipstick stain, a bracelet, a receipt, all it took to puncture the bubble of peace I'd been living in. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just started observing. In the days that followed, he became overly kind. Too kind. Flowers appeared on the counter, dinner invitations, little sticky notes on the fridge. "Love you." He'd once called those gestures corny. Now they were camouflage. One night when I got home from work, he was in the shower. His phone vibrated on the table, buzzing nonstop. The screen lit up. Elena. That name cut straight through me. To E on the bracelet. I didn't open the message, not yet. I just memorized the name, the little kiss emoji, and the cold sting crawling down my spine. That night, I lay next to him staring at the ceiling, listening to my heartbeat echo in the dark. And I knew some pain can't be treated with morphine or surgery. The only cure is truth. The next morning, I went to the hospital early, but not to work. I asked my friend, the head nurse, to swap shifts with me. Then I drove straight to San Antonio, 3 hours on the highway, with my heart turned to stone. Luna Jewelry sat on the main boulevard, its windows gleaming under the Texas sun. I walked in and introduced myself as the wife of a customer, Richard Walker. The clerk looked at me, then hesitated. "Oh, yes." He came in with a woman, Elena Moore. They picked out the bracelet together. She said she loved the engraving. I smiled, thanked her, and walked out, but my legs nearly gave out. Together, loved the engraving, Elena Moore. I wrote the name in my notebook, the same one where I used to record patients' prescriptions. On the way back, I stopped at a gas station and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't me. Pale face, red eyes, a smile long gone. I wasn't Diane Walker, the caring nurse, the devoted wife, the gentle mother. I was just someone slowly falling apart. That night when I got home, Richard was asleep. I sat at his desk and opened his laptop, typing the password I knew by heart. He hadn't changed it, the mistake of a man too confident. His email inbox glowed on the screen. I searched Elena, and there they were, dozens of messages. "Elena, I miss you. Thank you for the wonderful weekend." Richard, "You make me feel young again." Elena, "When will you tell her I don't want to be a secret forever?" Her. That was me. I read every word, pausing only to breathe. Then, like a nurse saving a patient file, I copied everything to a flash drive. Every message, every timestamp, every heartbeat. The next morning he looked surprised when he saw me in a dress, makeup on. "Going somewhere?" he asked. I smiled. "Just work." But instead I went to a law firm, not for divorce, not yet. I needed to understand property rights, inheritance laws, how to protect what's mine. Before I left, I asked the lawyer if I wanted to teach someone a lesson. Legally, is that possible? He smiled. "That depends on how smart you are." I smiled back. And in that moment, I knew Diane Walker, the woman who healed others, was about to become the one who made someone feel pain. When I got home, he was laughing softly on the phone, no doubt with Elena, his voice smooth as silk. "Yeah, I miss you too, baby." I walked past him and said gently, "I'm going to bed." He turned, smiled that fake, easy smile. "Good night, honey." I nodded, but in my mind, I was already building the plan as meticulously as prepping for surgery. Step 1, identify the weakness. And then step 2, create the illusion of safety. And step 3, deliver the bitter dose. And for the first time in my life, I felt calm. Not the calm of a nurse, but the calm of someone about to take revenge. I used to think that in medicine, the cruelest thing is watching a patient die, even after you've done everything you could to save them. But I was wrong. The cruelest thing is looking at a betrayer smiling, pretending you don't know, while every cell in your heart is bleeding. I began treating Richard as if he were a special kind of patient, one I had to observe clinically. I didn't watch him with a stethoscope, but with silence. And I realized silence is the most dangerous instrument a wife can wield. Every morning, I still made his coffee, the same way, black, no sugar, 2 ice cubes. I still placed his favorite newspaper on the table, folded neatly to the business section. Everything perfect, everything programmed. He suspected nothing. A cheating man always assumes women are too busy crying to be clever. He didn't know I had installed a tiny program on his phone, something a friend from the hospital's IT department helped me set up. Nothing illegal, nothing invasive, just a calendar sync between 2 devices. But I knew everywhere he went, every number he called, every email he sent. Friday, 6 p.m. He left the office early. The calendar notification popped up, dinner, EM, Elena Moore. No more doubt. I didn't call. I didn't text. I just drove. Years of nursing had taught me how to move quietly, how to observe from a distance without being seen, like monitoring a critical patient in the middle of the night. He turned into a small Italian restaurant downtown Austin. I parked across the street, watching through the glass. The warm yellow light fell on his face and on hers. She was at least 15 years younger than me. Long brown hair, red dress, full lips, the kind of woman he used to sneer at and call showy. Now he was smiling at her as if she were the only cure left for his aging soul. I watched them raise their glasses, laugh, touch hands across the table. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. This wasn't an affair. They were in love. And their love was a tumor growing inside my life, silent, aggressive, inoperable. I didn't cry. I just pulled out my phone and hit record. My hands didn't shake. I was no longer the broken wife. I was the doctor diagnosing her patient. And Richard, my patient, was about to be treated. When they left the restaurant, I followed. They stopped at a small hotel by the Colorado River. He opened the car door for her, gentle as in a movie. I sat in the dark and filmed everything. Part of me wanted to run to them, to scream, to break everything apart. But the other part, the cold clinical part, won. I just whispered to myself, almost tenderly, "You'll pay for this." The next morning, Richard came home. He pretended to be tired, said he had a late meeting with business partners. I made him coffee like always. "You look exhausted," I said. "Drink this." He smiled, warm as ever. "Yeah, long night." I looked at him with the same soft eyes I'd had for years. "Don't overwork yourself, okay?" He nodded, never realizing I was memorizing everything. His words, his frown, the rhythm of his breath. That afternoon, I went to see my closest friend Martha, a psychologist at the same hospital. I told her everything, no filters. Martha went silent, then said, "Diane, you have two choices. Let him go, or make sure he remembers you for the rest of his life." I asked, "If it were you, what would you choose?" She smiled sadly. "I'd make him remember." That answer echoed in my head all night. I started thinking about everything Richard truly valued. Not me, not our marriage, reputation. He was a man of appearances, the tailored suits, the perfect hair, the confident smile. He lived for admiration. Then that's where I'd strike. No knives, no guns, just the truth and a bit of presentation skill. I hired a private investigator, a former detective named Thomas Reed, who'd once worked on medical fraud cases. I didn't hide anything. "I need evidence," I said plainly. Photos, videos, texts, appointments, anything that proves infidelity. Thomas stared at me for a long time, then asked, "What do you plan to do with it?" I smiled, calm, almost serene. "I'm going to cure a chronic disease, lying." 3 days later, he sent me a file. Everything was there: photos of Richard and Elena at the hotel, payment receipts, restaurant camera footage, even a recording of them calling each other baby. I thanked Thomas and paid him double. "Don't contact me again unless I call you." He nodded. "You know, I've seen a lot of women break down over things like this, but you look like you're preparing for surgery," I said. "Because I am." The following days, I played the role of the perfect wife, better than ever. I smiled, cooked, hugged him every morning. The calmer I seemed, the safer he felt. The safer he felt, the closer I got. I started installing small cameras, one hidden in a flower vase in the living room, another in the garage. Not to spy, to wait. To capture the moment he'd trap himself. I knew Elena wouldn't stay the other woman forever. Women like her want everything or nothing, and I would give her everything, just not the way she expected. A week later, while I was at the hospital, Elena called Richard. I knew because the sync app still worked. Her text flashed on my screen. "I'm tired of hiding. I want to come to your house. I need to know when you'll tell her." I read it and smiled. "All right, Elena," I whispered. "Come." That evening, I told Richard, "The hospital needs me for an overnight shift. Don't wait up. Have dinner alone." He pretended to pout, but I saw the guilty joy in his eyes. "Work always comes first, right?" he said lightly. I kissed his cheek, locked the door. "Okay?" When I left, he waved goodbye, having no idea I only drove a few blocks away and parked in the shadows about 100 meters from the house. I saw Elena arrive, red dress, high heels tapping against the sidewalk. She rang the bell. Richard opened the door and pulled her inside. The door closed. I opened the camera app on my phone, the flower vase feed. On the screen, they were embracing in the living room, laughing. At last, some freedom, Elena said, her voice husky. I'll tell her soon, Richard replied. You know I will. I checked the time. 2 minutes, 3, 5. Then I hit REC. They had no idea they were being filmed in 4K HD, with audio crisp enough to hear every breath. I turned off the app, leaned back in my seat, and closed my eyes. Not joy, not sorrow, just a strange calm, the kind a doctor feels when she knows she's finally found the right diagnosis. 3 days later, I got a message from Elena, but it wasn't sent to me. Thanks to the Sync app, her texts to Richard appeared on my screen too. Richard, I have good news. I'm 3 days late. I froze. No, it couldn't be. A wave of dizziness hit me. I clenched my fists, and for a moment, every sound in the house disappeared. She might be pregnant. My phone slipped from my hand and hit the floor. For a few seconds, I felt completely drained, like a patient hearing she has terminal cancer. But just minutes later, the instinct I'd trained for years, the instinct of a nurse who's watched people die, came roaring back. I stood up, took a deep breath, wiped my face, and said to myself, it's okay. Every cancer cell has a way to be destroyed. I called Martha, my voice calm, steady. Martha, do you remember that strong antibacterial solution the infection ward used for trials? The one that caused mild skin reactions, she said. The one that makes your skin itch. Yeah, why? I smiled. Just want to run a little experiment. She laughed, thinking I was joking. Diane, you're scaring me. I didn't answer. That night I took a bottle of hospital disinfectant and mixed it with a few drops of medical dye, harmless, but enough to cause redness and itching on contact. It wouldn't kill her. It would just make sure Elena had a memorable experience. I poured the mixture into a fancy body lotion bottle, the same brand Richard had once bought for me, the one I knew she liked to borrow. Then I placed it in the bathroom, right where she'd easily see it if she came over. Saturday morning, I told Richard I'd be working double shifts at the hospital for 2 days. He looked regretful, but I saw that glimmer of guilty delight in his eyes. I'll miss you, he said, kissing my forehead. I drove off, then circled back an hour later, parking at the corner. Through the camera, I saw Elena arrive. I didn't know how long she'd stay, but I knew soon enough that flawless skin of hers would react to my harmless gift. 3 hours later, I got a text from Richard. Hey, do you know if there's something wrong with that lotion in the bathroom? Elena had a bad allergic reaction. I'm taking her to the doctor. This is so weird. I read it and smiled. Oh, sweetheart, I whispered, the weird part is only beginning. The next day I called Thomas, the private investigator. I need a few more things, I said. Can you get me Richard's business partners list and his meeting schedule for this month? Thomas asked. What's this for? I replied. To make the truth public, but only when the timing's right. That evening when I came home, Richard was sitting at the kitchen table looking uneasy. Elena had a serious allergic reaction, he said. Did you use any new products lately? I looked up, eyes pure and calm. Who are you talking about? He froze, then stammered. My new assistant. She had an allergy. I smiled softly. Oh, poor thing. He swallowed hard. The room fell silent. I met his eyes and asked quietly, Don't you think it's strange, Richard? The human body always reacts most violently to things it's incompatible with. He forced a laugh. That's a weird thing to say? Not really, I replied. Just professional experience. That night while he slept, I sat at the desk and opened my laptop. The camera's memory was full. I played the videos, every image, every sound, every touch. Each frame was a small incision under the skin. And I was the one holding the scalpel. I saved them all into a folder titled Treatment Plan, and when I turned off the light, I knew Richard's disease deceit was entering its final stage. I once learned that when a body's been infected too long, the doctor has no choice but to cut out the necrotic tissue. There's no other way. If you keep it, it kills the patient. My marriage was the same. And I. Diane Moore, a nurse with 20 years of experience, had become the surgeon in the final operation of my life. 3 days after the allergic reaction, Richard stopped mentioning Elena, but that didn't mean he stopped seeing her. I knew because the tracker still sent me updates every night. Elena's apartment, 8:43 p.m. He always chose the same place. A stupid habit. Cheating men have poor memory but strangely loyal instincts. I didn't act immediately. In medicine, if you want a patient to survive, sometimes you must let the fever rise, let the body show all its toxins. I wanted Richard to show everything. The more he exposed himself, the cleaner the cut would be. Friday night, I brought my medical bag to the hospital, but I didn't clock in for my shift. Instead, I parked 2 blocks from Elena's apartment. It was in a luxury complex, the kind of place where only the rich and the morally bankrupt live together. At around 8:40, I saw Richard's car pull up. He stepped out wearing a white shirt and black slacks, the uniform of adultery. She came out to meet him wearing a short silk dress, her hair loose, lips red like a warning sign. I didn't know to take pictures anymore. I had enough. I just sat in the car watching them disappear behind the glass door, and I began to think. Not about pain, about structure, the anatomy of revenge. It had to be precise, measured, targeted, like prescribing poison, and still making the patient thank you for the cure. I opened my laptop. Inside the treatment plan folder, I created a new file, Stage 3 psychological collapse. The next morning, I arrived at the hospital earlier than my shift. In the hallway, a young nurse, Hannah, came up to me. "Diane, you've got a visitor in the waiting room," she said. "A young woman. She looks nervous." I frowned. Who would come looking for me on a Saturday morning? When I stepped into the room, I saw her blue dress eyes swollen from crying, and I recognized her instantly. Elena. She jumped to her feet when she saw me, stammering, "Are you Mrs. Diane Moore?" I kept my composure. "Yes, and you are—" "Elena," she said, voice trembling. I think I need to talk to you." My heart clenched. I hadn't expected her to come to me. "I don't understand," I said softly. "Do we know each other?" She shook her head, tears spilling down her face. "No, but I have to tell you the truth. I can't take it anymore." I invited her to sit, poured her some water. She was shaking, gripping the plastic cup with both hands. Mrs. Moore, Elena said, I didn't mean to destroy your marriage. I didn't know. Richard lied to me. I forced myself to stay calm. Lied to you how?" She lowered her head, her voice breaking. "He said you were depressed, that you were in therapy and couldn't control your emotions, that your marriage was just an obligation. He said he needed someone who would listen." I went silent. Images flashed through my mind, the late nights, the cold hugs, the practiced smiles. I asked quietly, "And you believed him?" She nodded. "I did. He has a way of making people feel important." I gave a faint laugh. "Yes, Richard's always been good at that." She looked up at me, eyes red and glassy. I'm sorry, but I swear I didn't know who you were until I saw his photo in his wallet. Then I searched your name, and I realized he had a wife. I wanted to end it, but it went too far." "What do you mean too far?" I asked. She hesitated for a few seconds, then whispered so softly I almost didn't hear her, "Mrs. Moore, I'm pregnant." The room froze. The beeping of the heart monitors outside sounded like hammers against my skull. I set the cup down carefully. "How long?" "4 weeks," she said weakly. "I don't know what to do." I took a deep breath. Every instinct inside me, the nurse, the wife, the mother, collided violently. If I were a nurse, I'd comfort her. If I were a wife, I'd crush the cup in my hand. If I were a mother, I'd disappear. but I chose silence. And in that silence, I understood this wasn't betrayal anymore. This was annihilation. I said softly, "You don't have to worry. I'll help you." Elena looked stunned. "Really, I'm a nurse. I don't abandon someone who needs help." She broke down crying. "Thank you. I don't deserve it, but thank you." I stood gently resting my hand on her shoulder. "Go home. Get some rest. And keep this between us, at least for now. Don't tell Richard. I'll be in touch." She nodded. When she left, I sank into the chair, hands still trembling, not from fear, but because for a moment I'd seen something strange in her eyes, something familiar. That night, I dug through old patient records, peeling back my memory like a brain surgery on the past. And then I found it, 2003, my first pediatric surgery case. Patient Elena Martinez, 12 years old. Parents killed in a car crash, admitted with fractures and sepsis. I'd cared for her for 2 months. I remembered clearly the same eyes. Elena was that little girl. I gasped. Fate truly was a cruel prankster. I had once saved that girl's life, and now she was tearing mine apart. I sat there until midnight, staring at the old hospital photo. "You owe me a life," I whispered. "Now we're even." The next morning I met with Thomas. "I need you to do something I said." "What is it?" he asked. "I need the email addresses of all Richard's biggest clients, and I need them within 48 hours. He studied me. "You're going public." I smiled, my voice cool. "No, I'm sending out a medical notice." 2 days later, I received the list. I composed a short email signed as Anonymous Concerned Partner and attached a 10-second clip taken from the Vase camera, Richard and Elena wrapped in each other's arms, in the living room bathed in golden light. I didn't send it to the press. I sent it directly to his company's investors and board members. The email said only, "Before you sign your next contract, perhaps you should know the kind of man you're partnering with." After hitting send, I closed the laptop and exhaled. No joy, no regret, just the calm of a doctor who's just administered the final dose to a dying patient. 3 days later, the storm hit. Richard was suspended. Headlines read, "CFO accused of affair with subordinate." The photos were blurred, but anyone could tell it was him. That night, he came home pale as a ghost. "Diane, do you know anything about this?" I feigned surprise. "About what?" "Someone sent that video of me and Elena to the company I've been suspended." I slowly set my coffee cup down. "A video I thought you were just meeting with her." He went silent. No lie could save him now. I stepped closer, looked him straight in the eye. "Do you know what this kind of illness is called? Richard's systemic infection. When deceit spreads through the whole body, there's no cure except cutting it out." He collapsed into a chair, shaking. "Diane, I'm sorry. I didn't think it would go this far." I gave a faint, humorless smile. "You knew exactly what you were doing, Richard. You just never thought I'd be strong enough to respond." He said nothing. Then suddenly he looked up, desperate, furious. "You sent them, didn't you?" "You destroyed me over one mistake," I replied evenly. "No, Richard. I didn't destroy you. I just removed the rot." He shot to his feet, slamming the table. "You'll regret this. I didn't flinch. You should worry about yourself first." He stormed out the door, slamming behind him. 2 weeks later, I got a letter not from him, but from his lawyer. Richard was filing for divorce. I signed it immediately without reading the terms. I thought it was over. It wasn't. That night, Martha called, panic in her voice. "Diane, sit down. Richard's countersuing for invasion of privacy and defamation. He's accusing you of leaking the video." I sat still cold, spreading through my chest. "Does he have proof?" "No. But he's hired a high-end lawyer. If you don't fight back, you could lose everything." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Then he still doesn't understand. I'm not just a nurse. I've stitched up hundreds of wounds. I know how to make someone hurt without bleeding." 3 days later, I went to see Elena. She was living in a small apartment with floral wallpaper. Her face was pale, eyes hollow. When she opened the door and saw me, she froze. What are you doing here?" "I'm here to help," I said. "Richard's trying to blame both of us. If you don't want to lose everything, you need to stand with me." She looked confused. "I don't understand." I took out my phone and played a recording, Richard's voice from the night before. "You ruined me, Diane, but I won't go down alone. That little bitch will burn with me." Elena's face drained of color. "Oh my God." I looked at her, my voice like ice. "He doesn't love you, Elena. You're just a tool the same way I was once when he built his career." She sank into a chair, tears spilling again. I was so stupid." I placed a folder in front of her. "Sign this. It's a written statement saying Richard coerced you and that you didn't know he was married." She hesitated. "If I sign, I'll protect you," I said firmly. "You owe me a life. This is your chance to pay it back." She stared at me wide-eyed. "Well, what do you mean?" I looked straight into her eyes, calm. "In 2003, I was the nurse who saved you after the car accident in San Antonio. You don't remember me, but I remember every scar on your hand." She gasped, covering her mouth. "Oh my God, it was you." I nodded. "So Elena, it's your choice. Repay the debt or stay a victim." She picked up the pen and signed, a trembling signature but enough to end the game. A month later, the trial was over. Richard lost. He lost his job, his reputation, even the house. Elena left town, leaving behind a short letter. "Thank you for saving me twice, once when I was a child and once when I was grown." I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside my mother's photo, the woman who once told me justice isn't always gentle. That night, I sat on the porch. The wind brushed through my hair, the lavender from the front garden, drifting softly in the air. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "The surgery is complete." But somewhere inside me a dull ache remained like an old scar that never fully healed. I thought it was over, but I didn't know that on the other side of the city, Richard still had one last card left to play. I signed my name on a form, sent myself a calendar reminder, and set the pen down. They say the calmest moment is when you're lying to yourself. I learned that in flesh and bone during the 3 long weeks after David's financial case collapsed and his face appeared on the crime report. Back then, I thought I'd stepped into peace. He was arrested, his reputation destroyed. I picked up the shards and began rebuilding my life. But peace, it turned out, was only a thin shadow trembling at the smallest breeze. And that breeze had a name, Richard. Richard wasn't like David. He wasn't loud. He didn't use scandal as a weapon. He was composed, educated, articulate, with a smile that made you feel you were speaking to a philosopher rather than an enemy. When he reappeared in my life, the tone of the play changed. He'd once been a colleague, once shared part of my professional world at the hospital, once stood beside me during long night shifts. But his life moved in silence, deeper, slower. He didn't need to shout. He needed time to plan to plant. I can't remember the exact moment I began to suspect. Maybe it was that night when I received a small email, no sender, just one line. "We still have an unpaid debt, Diane." No signature, no direct threat, just that single cold sentence that made the hair on my arms stand up. I thought of Richard immediately because he was the only one who knew where I kept those old medical files, the only one who knew where I'd hidden my youthful mistakes, the only one who knew the weakness I'd used to protect my family for years' professional pride. Richard returned to town like a gray cloud, no announcement, no explanation, just quietly showing up in hospital board meetings, in public discussions about medical ethics. He smiled, asked how I'd been, how my kids were doing, then withdrew as if he were visiting a garden long claimed by the wind. And then, like tectonic shifts, the small accidents began. A batch of medicine mixed up in storage, a young nurse reprimanded unfairly, a copied record with a changed date. Each event alone could be explained. Together they formed a map, and the compass always pointed toward me. I was a nurse, and the job had taught me one thing: how to read the space between the lines. I began collecting those details. I checked every file, reviewed supply orders, called a few old colleagues. They all said the same thing: Richard is dedicated. He cares about patients. One compliment was easy enough, but those close to him knew that praise could be a mask. I didn't want to believe it, but when I saw 3 strange invoices in the medication system orders, showing an unusual spike in quantities legal terms, hiding under harmless labels, my heart skipped. I couldn't call it proof of guilt, but even a faint light can reveal part of a dark room. Then one night, while the city slept and I was stirring chicken soup on the stove to warm my chest, another email appeared. Again, just one line, "You thought you'd won, Diane, but the real winner hasn't shown yet." Attached was a compressed file. I opened it out of reflex, not because I wanted to, but because medicine had taught me, you face the truth, even when it hurts. The folder contained photographs Richard in a small, improvised lab, an old desk, a stopped clock, several test tubes, surgical instruments, and a handwritten board with smeared notes. Not real drug names, but coded symbols and comments like biological response optimization, assumed safety levels, no formulas, no manuals. But the picture was enough for me to understand Richard wasn't just playing with rules. He was researching something, a compound, a bioagent, a tool designed not to heal but to harm selectively. I closed my eyes. In medicine, I'd seen drugs save lives, and I'd seen drugs abused to control and to threaten. From that experience came a silent dread Richard might be creating something that could cause temporary damage enough to paralyze a victim, or fake evidence, the kind of act that could destroy a healthcare worker's reputation overnight. I knew better than anyone all it takes is a few hours, one falsified report, one conditional reaction, and an entire community loses faith. I never wanted, even in my darkest moments, for the man who'd once shared my night shifts to come after me like this. But as the images lay open on my screen, I understood Richard had intellect capability and, above all, purpose. It seemed he'd written himself a thesis of vengeance, researching, systemizing, experimenting, not for healing, but for control. I began watching him, the only way a nurse knows how discreetly, professionally, invisibly. I reached out to old colleagues and called Dr. R. Michael Hayes, someone I'd once thought of as a good shadow in my life. Michael and I had worked together years ago. He was an exceptional surgeon, calm, gentle, with a near reverence in his eyes whenever he looked at a patient. 10 years back, we'd faced an emergency case together, and he'd saved a life I was sure had already slipped away. Then our lives diverged. He went into research. I stayed in patient care. Our paths ran parallel. When I called and heard his voice again, something inside me softened. He said he'd come. Michael arrived on a rainy afternoon, his coat still damp. He looked just as I remembered, a few silver strands in his hair. Kind eyes, but now there was a guarded tone in his manner, like someone who'd learned not to trust coincidence. We sat in a small cafe by the river Rain, drumming softly on the windows, and I told him everything, the emails, the photos, the feeling of being watched. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he simply said, "Don't let this blind you, Diane. We need proof. Evidence is the only thing that can speak for you. Evidence for a nurse, that means blood records, samples." But Richard knew how to hide his tracks. He used legal phrasing, the subtleties of pharmacology, to blur everything. Michael and I started a silent campaign tracing medical suppliers, tracking small mismatches in purchase chains, following the whispers of unregistered trades. He used his connections in the lab. I used mine in the supply rooms. We told no one, only a few we absolutely trusted. But Richard was smart. He wasn't violent. He was methodical. He was developing something that theoretically could cause temporary physiological effects without clear clinical traces, chaos disguised as chemistry. A few hours of disorientation, panic, confusion, and before anyone could test the evidence would be gone. I didn't want to know the formula. Curiosity in medicine can easily become complicity, Michael said quietly. We don't need the chemistry, Diane. We need the pattern, the place he tested, the people who saw it. The night I found the box, the small one hidden behind a bookshelf in Richard's office, I nearly forgot how to breathe. Inside were notes on experiments, annotations, like safe low-dose effect, simulated allergic reaction. No specific compounds, no molecular sketches. Next to it was a journal. On the last page, scribbled hastily, "If she's shot into the dark corner, they'll see her as a broken brick." The words made me tremble, not from fear for my life, but fear for everything my profession stood for. Decades of integrity, hundreds of night shifts, thousands of small acts of care, all could crumble under one false foundation. I brought the box to Michael. He studied it, brow furrowed. "This is Big Diane," he said. "We're not dealing with a madman. This is systemic." He told me to stay silent, but inside I had already decided. If Richard wanted to play cruelly, I would play by his rules, but not with blood. I would retaliate with intellect, with legality. And yet, as I prepared my counterattack, I felt something cold stirring. I was starting to think like him. Planning, calculating, connecting threads. The first trap I set was a partial truth, an anonymous email sent to an independent testing lab. "Please examine the attached drug sample. It may contain an undeclared component. I couldn't risk signing it." Michael helped mask the source. The report came back marked abnormal low-dose reaction. It wasn't enough to arrest him, but it was bait. Enough to make him twitch. People started to notice. Richard panicked, but he was prepared. He withdrew into the shadows, changed his communication channels, and kept moving silently. The day I thought it was over came when the hospital released an internal report about errors in drug management. There was one phrase, "an irregular batch in imported supplies." That line cut like a blade. The report listed corrective measures, and among those responsible for review, Richard. He was placed right in the center like a match dropped in dry straw. I thought I'd watch him crumble under pressure, and that would be the end. But Richard struck back in a way I never expected. He didn't fight directly. He shifted suspicion toward me. Step by step, he planted seeds. A colleague said she'd seen me in the storage room after hours. A security camera showed my shadow near the medicine cabinets at night. Another colleague commented that I'd been acting strangely, thin lines subtle but enough to spark speculation. Maybe it's her. And in medicine, trust is the foundation. Once that shakes, everything else collapses. I woke one night, weeks later, to a text on my phone. I heard an old song. "Revenge is delicious. No name, no address, just that." I thought about the path I was on, vengeance, through exposure, through stripping him of power. I thought about Michael's voice. "We must not lose our souls in this." The words rang in my head like a bell of guilt. What did I really want? Revenge that cleanses or revenge that consumes? That night I wrote a long letter to myself, not for anyone else to see, reminding me what I once promised when I first wore a nurse's uniform, that this profession is built on compassion, not conquest. I wrote, "If the path you take hurts others out of the need to win, you've become what you once fought." I folded the letter, locked it in my drawer, but inside me a small ember turned sharper, colder. Resolve, calculation, a stillness that felt borrowed from Richard himself. The climax came on a gray Friday afternoon. Richard was summoned for questioning about the drug supply chain. Files opened, witnesses spoke. I sat in the hearing room, heart pounding, Michael beside me, silent. When it ended, it looked like we finally had enough for an official investigation. I exhaled, believing justice was about to catch the man who'd played God with medicine. But Richard laughed. He laughed like someone who just won a chess match. "I know what you're after," he said. "But you made one mistake. Our profession runs on trust. Lose that, and you've already shot yourself in the foot." He left the room, and the look he gave me froze my spine. 2 weeks later, horror struck. During a night shift, a patient suffered a severe reaction, unexplained sensitivity to medication, and the initial report flagged trace of unidentified agent. Before we could clarify the news, broke negligence scandal, nurse exploiting hospital access for personal gain. I read the headline with the weight of a stone pressing on my chest. They didn't have to name me. Everyone knew who they meant. Public opinion spun like a storm. That's when Richard seized the moment. He appeared on local television speaking about medical ethics, about accountability. He positioned himself as the savior. I watched his face through the screen. His words were perfect, but his eyes were empty, cold, calculating. Within hours, a new internal investigation was announced, not to arrest him, but to restore order. The perfect trap one he controlled completely. I sat in the locker room staring at my reflection. I looked exhausted. Everything I'd built now cloaked in suspicion. Colleagues avoided my gaze. Patients looked at me with doubt. One wrong headline, one false video, and decades of service meant nothing. That night, Richard sent me a handwritten note. "You're beautiful when you're silent." I wanted to throw it away instead. I wrote beneath it, "Silence isn't my answer." I didn't send it. I folded it and hid it in the closet next to my mother's old cookie mold. Then came the quiet turn. Michael told me he'd found a chain of hidden funding transactions through a shell organization Richard used for his research materials. It was enough to open a federal investigation, but just as we thought we were winning, the evidence twisted again. A video surfaced showing me in the storage room holding a test tube, seemingly experimenting on a patient. It was clear, crisp, professionally edited. It spread fast. Attached was a chilling message. "See, Diane, you're teaching me to become you." I looked at Michael, his face pale, stabbed by disbelief. I knew then this was Richard's final move. He didn't need to kill anyone. He only had to make the world believe I was the monster. And in that instant, I understood the real horror. Richard hadn't just researched a substance to cause chaos. He'd learned how to manipulate environments, fabricate evidence, splice memories, and turn victims into villains. I'd won through reason, through law. But he'd won through corruption, by crushing dignity, by turning me into a mirror of himself. I stood there hollow, my breath shallow. Michael took my hand, his eyes wet. "Diane," he said quietly, "we still don't know the full scope. If he could do this to you, he's done it before." I looked into the void and saw faces, patients, colleagues, friends, blurred ghostly. And I wondered, what have I traded, and for what? The answer wasn't clear. Richard was still out there, cold patient, calculating with one more move left, a move he called the perfect ending. I stood alone in my office that night, opened my drawer, and pulled out the letter I'd written to myself. My handwriting trembled. I ripped it in half, but didn't throw it away. I pressed it against my chest like armor stood tall and whispered, "If I'm going down, I won't go as my own enemy, but I will learn to defend myself." Outside, the rain fell like fine metal dust on the windows. And in that darkness, I knew Richard had the mind to turn science into a weapon, the patience to wait, and the cruelty to ruin lives with clean hands. In the distance, as if foretelling what's next, Michael laid a thick envelope on my desk. "A list of names he's been connected to," he said softly. "Some files still sealed." He added, "We'll see this through to the end, Diane. But promise me, if you ever feel yourself becoming his reflection, stop. Don't let revenge turn you into what you despise." I nodded, my mouth dry as medicine. Not because of the promise, but because I understood the road ahead would have no clear light. Richard had played his biggest card, a drug whose effect no one yet understood, and one final move I couldn't predict. I didn't know whether I'd rise or fall, only that I was no longer the same person, and perhaps that's exactly what Richard wanted to see. The past weeks felt like a string of mechanical clockworks inside a silent theater. Every movement measured, every action calculated, each tick pulling me closer to the end. I, Diane, a nurse who had tended to hundreds of fragile bodies, who once believed I could endure any danger, now realized the greatest danger didn't live outside the hospital room, but within the lab, inside the reports, within the very hands that once caressed me before they turned into weapons. Richard knew how to make everyone believe in science. He wore the white coat, smiled with charm during meetings, led research grants with that warm, confident voice. He once said he loved me in the language of a scientist, through samples, through data, through creative ambition, worth any sacrifice. I loved him differently through breakfasts on the kitchen counter, through neatly pressed linens, through midnight whispers. That's why when doubt first bloomed, I told myself, no, not him. But evidence is cold. One afternoon, as I folded used gloves, my phone buzzed with an anonymous email. Attached was an internal report, the text in black computer font numbers, clinical and dry, a summary of a secret project Richard had submitted to a Boston research fund. Title, Modulant-7. A name that sounded like science fiction. I skimmed the file, objective. To create a compound capable of modifying behavior or temporarily suppressing cognition intended for controlled experimental scenarios. Further lines overflowed with chilling terminology targeted delivery transient impairment reversible markers. My heart clenched in my chest. I remembered those nights when Richard spoke passionately about accelerating psychiatric treatment advancements. His eyes had shone as if he carried light into darkness, but light in the wrong hands becomes a weapon. I opened the hidden attachments images, handwritten notes, even short videos showing his first tests on mice. Nothing unusual at first glance, until I found a file labeled Clinical Scenario R. It showed a simulated experiment on a mock patient, a scenario built to make medical staff lose control under stress. In the video, Richard smiled calmly as he spoke. "We'll test the limits of perception. We'll awaken what's never been examined." The words carried ambition and the seed of evil. I knew two things instantly. First, if Modulant-7 could truly induce temporary cognitive breakdown, it could be used to manipulate or create false witnesses. Second, Richard wasn't pursuing science for humanity. He was doing it for power, for his own design. The puzzle came together. Money transfers, secret meetings, unofficial patients recruited for trials. Notes about employee motivation assessment, a euphemism for testing on healthcare workers. That night, I went straight to his lab. The room was lit by cold fluorescent light, smelling of ethanol and disinfectant. I opened drawers, small vials with coded labels, a few metallic casings. On the table lay the printed grant proposal signed by Richard. But what crushed me was the final note scrawled at the bottom. Priority ensure operational control over personnel with direct patient access. Contingency discrediting target via staged impairment if necessary. That word, discrediting, cut through me like a dull knife slicing through the fragile scaffolding of my life. When I turned, he was standing in the doorway, his hands cold, his eyes no longer familiar. "Diane," he said quietly, "I know you've seen it. You shouldn't interfere. Let science work." I shook my head. "Who are you doing this for, Richard? For patients? For the grant? Or for yourself?" He smiled a razor-blade smile. "For the future. You'll understand." I walked away, my resolve solidifying. If he intended to destroy me or use me as a test subject, I would not stay silent. My plan wasn't violent. I'm a nurse. I understand systems, paperwork, protocols, loopholes. I know how traces can vanish with a forged signature, an edited call log, or a deleted medical record. I also know the world only listens when you show hard evidence. So I began to collect it. I created an anonymous account and hired a private investigator, Martha, a middle-aged woman who once did me a favor early in my career. She didn't ask questions, she just worked. By day, I was the same nurse tending patients. By night, I was a shadow analyzing files, tracing documents, listing witnesses who'd seen Richard collect samples from their homes or who'd been paid in cash for off-hour work. I became a ghost between two worlds, one hand holding a stethoscope, the other sorting through data trails. Sometimes I broke. Many nights I cried not because of betrayal anymore, but because that betrayal wore a white coat and hid behind slogans like "for treatment, for progress." I asked myself, would I still recognize who I was if I fought back? Using his methods, I didn't want to become Richard. But how do you fight an enemy who owns every legal card? My first strike was strategic, not a full exposure, just enough to shake him. I sent an anonymous letter to the hospital board, attaching a screenshot of a chat where Richard discussed delaying reporting procedures during staff control trials. The reaction was immediate. An internal meeting was called. Richard was summoned and questioned. He answered smoothly, but his eyes flickered. He hadn't expected me to know that much. His retaliation was swift. Emails flew, employees were reassigned, he scrubbed trails, but more dangerously, he entered phase 2, making the world think I was unstable. People like Richard understand the power of the word unstable in a medical record. He knew how easily fabricated evidence could ruin trust. He began arranging absences in my shift logs, creating opportunities for small incidents to appear. I knew he was preparing a bigger act. I no longer trusted the police too easily influenced. Instead, I leaned on those I could trust: Martha, a few ethical colleagues, and Michael, my ex-husband, and the father of my son. Michael wasn't one for grand gestures. He worked quietly, setting up calls, collecting legal copies, tracking Richard's financial transactions. All discreet, all legitimate, and each one tightened the noose. Then came the night of his final move. Richard decided to test Modulant-7 on me, not through violence, but through orchestration. He invited me to a late-night medical seminar, saying he needed me to evaluate a simulation. The document bore the board's signature, Diane Hart, clinical consultant support for mock trial session. I agreed out of duty and out of caution. I wanted to keep him within sight. That was my second mistake, underestimating how well Richard wrote scripts. The hall was silent, bathed in amber light. Richard stood before a whiteboard speaking about decoding cognition. I participated, asked questions, took notes. In one corner sat a sealed box labeled for controlled trial. I asked, "What's in the box?" He smiled. "Just simulation material. Nothing concerning." A lie, I thought, but the show went on. We drank coffee, exchanged small talk. It all felt harmless. At 11, Richard called me on stage to simulate calming an agitated patient. I followed the script, reassured, took blood pressure, documented notes. Then a technician hired by Richard handed me a syringe. "Just saline," he said, "for realism." I didn't doubt it. Why would I? No one would hand me anything unsafe in a supervised trial. I injected it into the dummy perfectly by the book. Everyone clapped, laughed. An hour later, heat flooded my head like steam pressing behind my skull. My vision blurred, sound warped, my legs felt foreign. Through the haze, I saw Richard watching calm, observant recording. He wasn't my husband anymore. He was a researcher, detached and cold. Time slowed. I tried to breathe, but air wouldn't move. I tried to call Michael's name, but my voice sank underwater. Half an hour later, I came to on the floor, co-workers holding ice to my forehead. Richard knelt beside me, voice soft. "Diane, are you okay?" He sounded caring, but I saw it. He'd done this. He'd injected me with something that wasn't saline. That night, I lay in bed, limbs heavy as lead. The next morning, my mind sharpened with a singular focus. I called Michael. He and Martha pulled the conference CCTV footage. A side camera captured the technician handing me the syringe, Richard signaling with his hand. The contents weren't visible, but intent was. I needed proof, chemical proof. When Richard left town on a business trip, I broke into his lab, careful, methodical, leaving no trace. I cataloged every vial, every label. No Modulant-7, but one box marked Batch R07. I took samples and handed them to Martha for independent testing. 2 days later, the results came back. The compound was unlisted, affecting the central nervous system, causing temporary emotional and cognitive suppression, matching Modulant-7's description. It fit everything I'd experienced. I finally had evidence. I didn't go to court too slow, too corruptible. I went to the press. A rapid investigation piece went live, including lab results. Richard was suspended immediately. The Research Council launched an inquiry. He was barred from all funding. Social media exploded. Mad scientist exposed. I breathed not relief, but survival. He didn't let the story rest. 3 nights after the article published, there was a loud knock. Michael stood at the door, pale. "Mom," he said, trembling, "there are police downstairs." My phone buzzed, an unknown number. Text, "Good friends know how to end a story." I opened my email. A video attached Richard being attacked in a parking lot, blood pooling, a card beside him reading, "Thank you for staying silent." My body went cold. The world spun. Who was alive and who wasn't? News confirmed it. Richard found unconscious in his car, severely injured. An accident, they said. But we knew. I visited his hospital room. He lay beneath white sheets. His eyes fluttered open. Voice faint. "Diane, you did..." Well, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He slipped back into unconsciousness. The world cheered. Justice served. But inside me a whisper asked, had I crossed the line I'd fought with truth, but someone else had finished him with violence. I called Martha, told her to gather all evidence on the attack. She said softly, "They'll find out, Diane. Be careful." Authorities dug deep. Funding pulled. Accounts frozen. Offshore contracts surfaced. It seemed like victory. I turned everything over to the FBI. For the first time in months, I slept unchased by shadows. Until the call came. Martha's voice shook. They found a vial, Diane, labeled Modulant-7, and a note, "Do not dispose. Evidence to be retained for follow-up. RH." Rain hit my window in steady rhythm. My blood froze. His handwriting. If Richard was gone, who wanted to keep his work alive? Who attacked him? Who benefited from his silence? The investigation deepened. An email to Richard from weeks before appeared, "Project Orion ready. Proceed when convenient." Just one line. But it unraveled 100 questions. Who was Orion? A tech partner? A shadow group? A code name for someone else? The thought chilled me. I remembered Richard once half-joking, speaking about the loops in science, how inventions survive by replicating themselves. I thought he meant cells or data. Now I realized he meant consciousness, a self-sustaining system. When Richard was officially declared dead suicide in custody, the media called it the mystery of Hemsworth. Something in me broke and quieted. I stood among mourners and cynics alike, feeling hollow. Part of me wanted satisfaction, part felt an emptiness, as if I'd pulled a puppet's strings without knowing who held the other end. Weeks later, a small file arrived anonymously, an audio recording. At first static, then his voice weak, distant. "Diane, they think I'm dead, but a version of me can't die. You think you ended me. You haven't understood I left behind what I feared most, the network." He laughed softly. "If you're not careful, you'll carry the mark next. Do you want to know what Orion means?" "It's not a person, Diane. It's the push that keeps everything going. And you may already carry the first trace of Modulant-7 I created." The room spun. The thought that Richard might have left a trace of Modulant-7 in my body or my medical file froze my veins. I ordered lab tests. Results came back ambiguous. A genetic anomaly. A variation not identical to Modulant-7 but similar. Residual, they said. Or temporary mutation. No one dared confirm. The case was too big. His final words in the recording haunted me. "You think you've won, Diane, but the loop has only begun. They'll find ways for Modulant to live without its name. I planted the seed. Now they'll see you as the soil." He chuckled that same deceitful, charming laugh before the sound faded. I stared at the recorder until my pulse fractured. The true danger wasn't whether Richard lived or died, it was the idea. Ideas don't die, they replicate, they infect. A formula, an algorithm, a behavioral blueprint. Once released, it survives in systems, in code, in people. I stood at a crossroads. Bury everything and live in false peace, or expose everything and risk annihilation. I chose a third path, fragile, but mine to live with ambiguity without letting it consume me. I released all my documents to independent agencies, accepted the risk of becoming a target, and stepped away from the spotlight. I went back to work. I touched patients again. I washed my hands. I stitched everyday wounds. I stayed busy. I learned to accept that part of this war would live inside me forever, perhaps as a molecule, perhaps as a scar that makes me see fractures in every face. One night as I walked home under the long yellow streetlights, a man sat on a bench motionless. He raised a hand, holding a thin piece of paper. I stopped, written in black ink. "You did well, but remember, even the best-laid systems evolve." R. The signature, a scrawl I recognized. My heart froze. It wasn't Richard, but it was something connected to him. A follower, a successor, or the system itself speaking through flesh. The man smiled faintly, then disappeared into the crowd like mist. I don't know if that meeting was a threat, a message, or a blessing. I only know that from that day forward, I woke with a different kind of awareness. Modulant-7 might be buried in records, but what he created won't die easily. Systems adapt, replicate, evolve. If someone truly wants it, they'll bring it back, disguised, improved, untoppable. Our story ends open like a book closed, just to be reopened later. I'm not a winner, not in any celebratory sense, nor am I defeated. I'm a survivor carrying the mark of the battle, not just on paper, but in my chest, in the way I wake each morning, in the way I look at Michael, in the way I place the stethoscope on a patient's heart. Some nights I ask myself, if an idea can live forever, do we still have the right to fear it, or must we learn to coexist the way we coexist with weather, with seasons? Richard is dead to the world, legal files closed. Officials declared victory over scientific abuse. But beneath the surface, meetings continue about the loop, the Orion Protocol, and how to manage a technology that can be both angel and demon. Where can I go? I can choose silence, cherish meals, moments, quiet evenings, or keep fighting the endless war. For now, I've chosen to live not by forgetting, but by remembering carefully. I live with evidence, with betrayal, and with vigilance that never sleeps. One warm afternoon, Michael asked, "Do you regret it, Mom?" I looked out the window at the smooth fabric-like sky. "Yes," I said. "I regret many things, but not standing up." He nodded, sadness flickering in his eyes. We sat in silence, listening to the soft ticking of the oven, and I realized sometimes revenge doesn't heal. It simply proves you're still alive. That final night before turning off the light, I opened the box, the Modulant-7 reports, lab photos, Richard's recordings. I placed them in a small sealed bag, set it on the top shelf, and locked it. Not to destroy, not to share, but to keep. One day, someone will open it. Maybe soon, maybe years from now, and they'll read every line. They might curse me, they might praise me, or they might continue the game. I placed my hand on the box and whispered, "If you're still alive, as data, as evidence, as a memory, let me be the one to decide what happens next. Don't let the idea breed itself again." Outside the window, the city breathed quiet and slow. I turned off the light, and as the dark rose around me, I thought I heard a whisper, faint, like wind through leaves. "The loop isn't closed." I smiled into the dark, not sweetly, not in triumph, but with the calm of someone who finally understood why she must keep waking up every morning. Deep inside my chest, where the pulse still beats steady, there was something new. Even if Richard was gone truly, or by illusion, what he left behind remained like a seed that doesn't know regret. And I had learned one final lesson. Sometimes to end a loop, you don't strangle the idea to death. You learn to live with it and change the way it grows. I turned on the nightlight, closed my eyes, and waited, knowing with quiet certainty that this story, mine, Richard's, and Modulant-7's, was not over yet. The world moved on as if nothing had happened. Hospitals kept humming, patients kept breathing, and in the corners of sterile rooms, the fluorescent lights still trembled in their fixtures. But beneath that everyday rhythm, something else was breathing, a current subtle and invisible like static before a storm. And I could feel it under my skin. They said Richard was dead, papers, signed death certificate, sealed a short paragraph in the Austin Chronicle calling him a fallen pioneer. Yet every night at 2 a.m., my phone glowed with a pulse of light, no message, no number, just a single flicker. The first few times I dismissed it as a system glitch. But glitches don't keep perfect time. They don't arrive with the precision of a heartbeat. Weeks passed. My sleep thinned to glass. I returned to the hospital trying to resume the predictable loop of blood pressure readings and chart entries, but even the monitors seemed to breathe wrong. Every flatline hiss reminded me of him. Every beep was a whisper. You're not done. One rainy Thursday, a man in a gray coat appeared in the ER lobby. He wasn't bleeding. He wasn't sick. He simply stood at the desk and asked for me by name. Diane Hart, he said, Federal Oversight